If you've been scrolling through endless rows of countertop ice makers, watching video after video and still can't decide which one actually fits your kitchen, this review is here to cut through the noise. I've spent the last few weeks watching people unbox, set up, and actually use a handful of models, and I've talked to a few folks who run small home bars and need a reliable source of ice every night. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. Let's be honest, buying an ice maker isn't just about the 274 pounds per day number you see on the box. The real question is whether that output translates into something useful for you, without stealing precious counter space or becoming a constant hum in the background. The biggest mistake I see people make is choosing a unit that either dwarfs their actual need or, conversely, picking a tiny machine that can't keep up when the party kicks in. That's the risk you run when you ignore how the appliance will sit in your routine and just chase the headline specs. The Ice-O-Matic GEMD270A2 sits in the mid-size sweet spot of countertop pearl ice makers. It's an air-cooled unit, which means you don't have to hook it up to a water line for cooling, just a standard outlet and a place for the built-in bin. The machine produces pearl ice, the small, rounded nuggets you see in many upscale bars. Those pearls are great because they melt slower than cubed ice, keeping drinks colder longer without diluting them. In practice, that means you can fill a pitcher of sangria or a punch bowl and the ice will stay firm for hours, a subtle but noticeable upgrade over the watery slush you get from cheap cube makers. One of the first things I tested was the touch-free dispenser. You press a button, and a small amount of ice slides out into the glass without you having to lift the lid. For a home bar that sees a lot of traffic, that convenience eliminates a lot of finger grease buildup and makes it easier to keep the bin clean. The water dispenser works the same way, offering a quick splash of filtered water handy if you want to rinse a glass or add a splash to a cocktail without reaching for a separate pitcher. Now, let's talk about the strengths that actually matter when you start using this thing day to day. First, the daily output. At 273 pounds of pearl ice in a 24-hour cycle, the GEMD270A2 can churn out roughly 500 ice pieces per hour. In real terms, that's enough to keep a small gathering of 10 to 15 people supplied for an entire evening, and you'll still have ice left for a second round. The bin holds a generous amount of ice, so you don't find yourself constantly refilling the dispenser. Second, the air-cooled design means you won't need a dedicated water hookup for the cooling system, which simplifies installation in apartments or kitchens without a spare line. Third, the unit's self-clean cycle runs automatically every few days, flushing out any mineral buildup that can happen when you're using tap water. For anyone who doesn't want to schedule a monthly deep clean, that's a real time saver. On the flip side, there are a few practical trade-offs you need to weigh. Because the machine is air-cooled, it needs a few inches of clearance around the back and sides to allow proper airflow. If you have a cramped countertop, you'll have to dedicate a small nook to the unit, or else you'll hear it working louder than you'd like. Speaking of noise, the compressor does emit a steady hum that's noticeable when you're standing right next to it, perfectly normal for any cooling appliance, but something to consider if you're setting it up near a kitchen island where people gather. The water line for the dispenser is optional, so if you want a constant flow of filtered water you'll have to install a small line yourself or rely on the built-in reservoir, which needs refilling every few days if you use it heavily. Another subtle downside is the cost. This isn't a budget-friendly gadget, it sits in the higher-end range of countertop models. The price is justified if you're looking at the long-term output and the low waste factor. Pearl ice doesn't shatter into tiny slush like cube ice, so you waste less ice and spend less on replacements. However, if you only need ice once a month for a birthday party, you're probably paying for capacity you'll never use. So, who should press add to cart on the GEMD270A2? If you host weekly dinner parties, run a small home-based cocktail service, or you're a frequent entertainer who wants consistent, slow-melting ice without the hassle of refilling a bin every half hour, this unit hits the mark. It also makes sense for people with a dedicated bar fridge or a side counter where the machine can sit quietly while still being accessible. The built-in water dispenser adds value for anyone who likes to pour a quick glass of water without opening a separate pitcher. Conversely, who should